Just before our 15th wedding anniversary, my spouse, Adam, had me sit down and stated plainly, "I'm seeking a divorce, and the house will remain mine, as you lack the financial means to maintain it." His relatives displayed smirks and concurred with nods. I rose silently, presented a file across the table, and remarked, "In that case, you'll be thrilled with what my legal counsel provided me this morning." Upon his perusal of the initial page, his self-satisfied demeanor dissipated, and his mother exclaimed, "This is unbelievable." I was seated at our dining table, my hands clasping a cup of coffee, as Adam, my husband, made a sound to clear his throat. His mother and father were next to him, his mother already exhibiting a smirk, while his father appeared detached, as though this was an ordinary day. Adam placed his hands together on the table, tilting forward a bit, resembling a presenter of a business deal. "I'm seeking a divorce," he declared, his tone steady. "And the house will remain mine, as you lack the financial means to maintain it." His mother's smirk grew. His father offered a subtle nod, endorsing his son's choice, suggesting a prior discussion excluding me. A knot formed in my stomach, yet I maintained a neutral expression. This had been on my mind for some time. I detected the shifts, the prolonged work hours, the hushed conversations on the phone, the increasingly cold behavior of his family, who had never been especially welcoming. Additionally, there was the issue of finances. It had always been a source of friction. Adam originated from a prosperous background, while I did not. His parents had from the outset communicated their view that I was inferior, a girl from a modest town who held 2 jobs to finance her education. They deemed me undeserving of their son, asserting I should feel privileged he had selected me. Their opinions never affected me. I had established a fulfilling existence with Adam, or so I believed. However, during the recent year, the financial records became puzzling. The collective savings accumulated over a decade and a half were decreasing, yet I wasn't the one making withdrawals. Inquiries to Adam were met with dismissal. "I'm managing the finances, no need for concern," he'd say, giving a paternalistic pat on my forehead. I, however, remained concerned, initiated my own inquiry, and the findings were chilling. Consequently, as Adam maintained his smug posture across from me, and as his mother signaled her agreement, seemingly victorious in an unspoken contest I hadn't realized I was part of, I placed my coffee down deliberately. I retrieved a substantial manila envelope from my bag. I pushed it across the surface of the table. "In that case, you'll be thrilled with what my legal counsel provided me this morning," I stated. Adam displayed a frown, his assurance slightly diminished. He took the envelope and opened it. As he reviewed the first page, his complexion paled. His mother, looking over his shoulder, manifested a distorted, unpleasant expression. "This is unbelievable," she exclaimed loudly. I reclined in my chair, my head angled slightly. "Oh, but it is," I confirmed, and I permitted them to continue reading. A decade and a half of marriage, a decade and a half of alliance, that's what I believed we shared. It became evident that Adam had been orchestrating this for an extended period. The initial discovery was Adam's surreptitious transfer of funds from our shared account to an individual one under his name, discreetly and systematically over many years. Initially, the amounts were modest, barely perceptible, a few hundred occasionally, a couple of thousand at other times. But the transfers became more substantial, 10,000, then 20,000, until one day, upon accessing our account, I observed that what should have amounted to well over 100,000 in savings had diminished to barely sufficient for a single month's expenses. I, naturally, challenged him. I questioned the whereabouts of the funds. He responded with laughter, actual laughter. "You wouldn't comprehend," he stated, shaking his head. "Just allow me to manage it." It was at that point I understood he had no intention of managing anything. Thus I engaged a specialist in forensic accounting. Their discoveries were shocking. Adam wasn't merely relocating funds, he was engaging in gambling. He was participating in questionable investment ventures. He was expending considerable sums on an individual who was not me. Even more concerning, his parents were aware of this. The residence, the one he presumptuously assumed he would retain due to my supposed inability to afford it, it transpired that I didn't have to afford it, as it wasn't his to claim. You see, at the time of our home purchase, Adam's parents had been insistent on contributing. They provided a substantial portion of the initial payment, a fact they never failed to remind me of. Unbeknownst to them, their contribution generated documentation. They had indeed invested money in the property, but they had also included their names on the title, granting them a stake, which in turn meant that upon my uncovering of Adam's covert liquidation of our assets, including attempts to encumber the house without my knowledge, I possessed the legal authority to obstruct him. Due to his indebtedness, his dubious transactions, and the fraudulent activities he had perpetrated using my identity, yes, that too came to light. The judicial system would not be granting him anything. The residence would not be his. The financial accounts would not be his. The enterprise he had endeavored to establish with misappropriated funds? Gone. And the most satisfying element, his parents, who had displayed their smirks at me from their side of the table, were now confronting the reality that their son's financial collapse was also their own, due to their co-signature on his unsuccessful ventures, their facilitation of his concealment of assets, their enabling, encouragement, and instigation of his belief that he could discard me like an obsolete possession and emerge without repercussions. His mother, in a dramatic gesture, clutched at her necklace while his father, typically unemotional, massaged his face with his hand, grasping the depth of the situation. Adam slammed the file shut, his jaw set tightly. "This isn't concluded," he stated through gritted teeth. I offered a smile. "Oh, darling," I responded, rising and retrieving my coffee. "It concluded the moment you failed to appreciate my capabilities." And with that, I exited my own residence for the time being, as it would soon be solely mine. Adam remained seated, his expression a blend of fury and apprehension. His mother maintained her state of astonishment, while his father examined the documents, his hands displaying a slight tremor. I could perceive their universe disintegrating around them, yet this was merely the commencement. As I departed the dining area, Adam sprang from his seat. "You won't be seizing my residence," he stated menacingly. I paused, turning to confront him. "Are you referring to our jointly owned residence?" I inquired, raising an eyebrow. "Or are you referencing the residence you endeavored to sell without my knowledge?" His jaw remained clenched. His mother, recovering from her daze, directed a quivering finger toward me. "You conniving." I raised a hand to interrupt. "Be mindful," I advised, my tone composed yet resolute. "You might wish to conserve your energy for the legal representatives you will shortly require." I proceeded to exit through the main entrance, allowing it to close firmly behind me. The ensuing weeks were characterized by intense turmoil. Adam initiated continuous communication via phone calls and text messages. The tone of the messages alternated between conciliatory and enraged. "Let's engage in discussion. We can resolve this." "You possess no authority to inflict this upon me." "This is my dwelling. You are incapable of prevailing." However, I refrained from responding. Instead, I delegated the communication to my legal counsel. And that's when Adam committed his subsequent significant error. One evening, at approximately 2 a.m., I received a call from a resident of my neighborhood. "Hello," she said hesitantly. "I don't intend to cause undue concern, but Adam is present at the house and he is discarding items onto the front yard." I sat upright in bed. "What do you mean by discarding items?" "I mean he's launching furniture out the front entrance in a manner resembling an individual in a state of frenzy. His mother and father are also present." I was already dressing. "Did you contact the authorities? I was uncertain whether to do so, but I believe you should come over here." I secured my car keys and proceeded directly to the location. Upon my arrival, the scene before me was beyond belief. The front yard was in complete disarray. My sofa, my chairs, even my literary collection. Every item I had introduced into that residence was dispersed across the grass. Adam was positioned on the porch, his respiration labored, while his mother issued directives with the authority of a military commander. "She no longer maintains residence here," she exclaimed. "Dispose of all of it." His father maintained a silent presence, his hands resting on his hips, his appearance conveying fatigue rather than anger. I exited my vehicle, holding my mobile phone. "What in the world are you engaged in?" Adam turned, his face displaying a reddish hue. "You departed, did you not? You exited, signifying abandonment. This now constitutes my dwelling." I exhaled slowly. "You truly possess a limited understanding of legal matters, do you not?" I proceeded up the driveway, elevating my phone to ensure he could observe the display. Incidentally, the law enforcement officers are already en route. His mother's expression contorted with rage. "You summoned them?" "No, I," replied smiling. "The neighbor did." Precisely at that moment, illuminating red and blue lights illuminated the street. The subsequent moments were indistinct. The officers posed inquiries. I provided a comprehensive explanation, and Adam remained, his speech faltering, as he comprehended the immense error he had committed. Because in his frantic endeavor to assert ownership of the residence, he had just perpetrated unlawful eviction and destruction of property, and was now facing legal repercussions. But Adam's actions were not concluded. A few days subsequently, my legal counsel contacted me. "He is mounting a counteroffensive," she informed me. "He is endeavoring to prolong this matter through litigation." "Naturally he is." "He is also alleging that you were the individual concealing funds," she added. I almost expressed amusement. "Oh, that's highly ironic." "It will not withstand scrutiny," she assured me. "We possess all the documentation. But be forewarned, he is in a state of desperation, and individuals in such a state are prone to imprudent actions. Indeed, the very next day, I received a notification from my financial institution. An attempt had been made to gain access to my personal account, and I was certain of the perpetrator's identity. Adam was experiencing a downward spiral. He was relinquishing control, and he was cognizant of this fact. Thus he was now seeking any means to inflict harm upon me. But what he failed to realize was that I had maintained a strategic advantage throughout this entire ordeal, and this conflict, it was far from concluded. Adam's effort to gain entry to my individual banking account represented the culmination of his actions. Prior to this, his conduct had been characterized by recklessness, arrogance, and manipulation. But this was indicative of desperation and illegality. I did not merely retain this information. I took prompt measures. I contacted my legal representative. "We must initiate a freeze on all assets," I declared. "All accounts, all holdings. I do not wish him to have access to any funds." She concurred and commenced the necessary procedures. Within a matter of hours, Adam was denied access to all financial accounts that still bore my name. And subsequently, as an additional measure, I transmitted a solitary text message to him. "A commendable attempt. I trust you will find satisfaction in elucidating fraudulent activity to the presiding judge." His response arrived within seconds. "You are causing the ruination of my existence." I examined the message, experiencing a peculiar sensation of contentment. "No, Adam, you accomplished that independently." However, just as I believed I had effectively cornered him, he executed an action I had never anticipated. He invited his paramour to reside in the house. And not merely any paramour, it was an individual with whom I was acquainted. Her name was Danielle. She was a shared acquaintance, someone I had encountered through Adam's professional gatherings. She had consistently exhibited excessive familiarity with him, responding to his inane jests with laughter, making physical contact with his arm with undue frequency. Yet I had not attributed significant meaning to it. It transpired that I should have. A neighbor transmitted a photograph depicting them removing luggage from her vehicle, entering my residence as though they had been awarded a prize. I scrutinized the image, my hands trembling with fury. I was not experiencing emotional devastation. That phase had concluded. I was now consumed with rage. This individual had depleted our financial resources. He had engaged in deceit, infidelity, attempted to appropriate the house, and now he possessed the gall to introduce another woman into the residence prior to the legal dissolution of our marriage. I was not prepared to accept this passively. I transmitted the photograph to my legal counsel. "We must expedite our actions," I stated. She sighed. "He is constructing his own downfall. I assure you, simply permit him to continue committing errors." However, I was no longer inclined to exercise patience, and consequently, I initiated an action of my own. I had been retaining a piece of information, awaiting the opportune moment to utilize it, and that moment had now arrived. You see, Adam had not merely exhibited poor financial judgment, he had also engaged in fraudulent activities of a different nature. A few years prior, he had secured a substantial loan utilizing his parents' identities without their knowledge. He had falsified their signatures, exploited their creditworthiness, and subsequently squandered the majority of the funds through gambling. His parents were unaware of this due to his timely repayment of the loan installments until recently, as he now lacked the financial means. Therefore, I provided an anonymous notification. A solitary telephone call sufficed. A week later, his parents were in receipt of a communication from the financial institution, followed by a legal action. They were subjected to an investigation for fraudulent activity, and unless they could demonstrate that they had not personally secured the loan, they were liable for hundreds of thousands of dollars. It did not require an extended period for them to discern the connection, and upon doing so, pandemonium ensued. I was situated in a coffee establishment when I received the message from Adam's mother. "You orchestrated this. I trust you are experiencing contentment." I displayed a smirk and consumed a portion of my beverage before responding. "No, Adam orchestrated this. You merely provided him with excessive protection." That same evening, Adam contacted me via telephone. I permitted the call to go unanswered. Subsequently, he transmitted a text message. "We must engage in conversation. I implore you." I disregarded it. An hour later, an additional text message arrived. "Danielle has departed." I read it twice. Subsequently, another. "My parents have ceased communication with me." And finally, "Are you experiencing contentment now?" I reclined in my chair, scrutinizing the words on the display, and for the first occasion in an extended period, I experienced a sensation of liberation. However, this matter was not yet concluded, not by a considerable margin. Adam's frantic text messages persisted, but I refrained from responding, initially. However, a shift occurred. A few days following Danielle's departure, I received a telephone call from an unidentified number. I would not have typically answered, but an instinct prompted me to do so. It was Adam's father. "You must come to the residence," he stated, his voice exhibiting strain. "No?" I responded hesitantly. What would be the purpose of such an action? A prolonged silence ensued. Then, in a tone I had never previously encountered from him, he stated, "I beseech you." I was uncertain of my expectations upon arriving at my residence, but it was not this. The once meticulously maintained lawn was now unkempt. The main entrance was partially ajar, and within a scene of utter devastation. Furnishings were overturned. The walls bore indentations, and amidst the wreckage, Adam was seated languidly upon the sofa, a bottle of alcoholic beverage positioned on the coffee table, partially consumed. His complexion was pallid, his eyes devoid of vitality. His mother maintained a rigid posture near the entrance, her arms folded, as though seeking to disassociate herself from the disarray. His father was seated opposite Adam, his appearance conveying exhaustion and resignation. I inhaled deeply. "What is the reason for my presence here?" Adam raised his head, his gaze meeting mine, and for the first occasion since the commencement of this entire ordeal, I perceived something other than arrogance or fury. I perceived apprehension. "I have experienced the loss of everything," he murmured. I offered no response. He emitted a mirthless laugh. Danielle absconded with the minimal funds I retained. My parents are facing legal action. The residence, it is no longer under my ownership. Is that correct? I simply gazed at him. His mother emitted a scoff. This is a consequence of your actions. She directed at me, her voice filled with venom. I turned to her gradually. A consequence of my actions? I reiterated, my tone composed yet incisive. Indeed, she retorted. You could have withdrawn. You could have refrained from pursuing this matter, yet you chose to inflict destruction upon everything. I emitted a humorless laugh. I inflicted destruction upon everything? Or did your son accomplish that when he depleted our financial accounts? Or when he perpetrated fraudulent activity? Or when he introduced his paramour into my residence? She opened her mouth to speak, but Adam interjected abruptly. She is accurate, mother. His mother's head turned sharply. I beg your pardon? Adam swallowed with difficulty. She is accurate. I perpetrated this. I believed I could, I am uncertain, initiate a fresh start, eliminate her and progress. However, he surveyed the wreckage of his own existence. I experienced defeat, and now I possess nothing. For a brief period, silence prevailed. Then, his mother directed her attention toward him. Are you simply going to remain seated and concede defeat? She inquired, her voice laced with venom. What alternative course of action is available to me? He retorted, his voice exhibiting a tremor. I endeavored to resist, and I experienced defeat. His father, who had maintained silence throughout this period, finally spoke. Perhaps it is time for you to cease assigning blame to her and commence accepting the repercussions of your own decisions. His mother turned upon him. Are you now aligning yourself with her? His father sighed. I am not aligning myself with anyone. I am simply experiencing fatigue. And for the first occasion, I comprehended it. His father was weary of providing cover for Adam, weary of offering excuses for him, weary of the disorder. Adam's mother exited the premises abruptly, forcefully closing the door behind her. Adam rubbed his hand across his face. She will never extend forgiveness to me, he muttered. She will never extend forgiveness to me? I corrected, because it is less challenging to harbor animosity toward me than to concede that she nurtured a failure. Adam displayed a flinch, but he offered no argument. I surveyed the interior of the residence, absorbing the totality of the scene. I presume this signifies your intention to cease contesting my claims in a judicial setting? He exhaled. What would be the purpose? That constitutes the most sagacious statement you have uttered in many years. A mirthless smirk appeared on his countenance. It is fitting that I would attain sagacity only upon experiencing the loss of everything. I offered no response. Instead, I reached into my bag, extracted a set of documents, and positioned them upon the table. The conclusive agreement, I stated. Affix your signature, and this entire matter concludes today. Adam scrutinized the documents, his hand suspended above the writing instrument. Then, with a sigh of resignation, he signed. In that instant, it was concluded. The subsequent events, the residence became mine, legally and officially. Adam vacated the premises the following day. He gathered the minimal possessions he retained and departed without uttering another word. His parents, well, his father appeared to express relief at the conclusion of the matter, but his mother, she declined to acknowledge my presence. That was acceptable. She no longer constituted a concern for me. Danielle, she vanished. The last information I received indicated that she had depleted the minimal funds Adam possessed and proceeded to her subsequent objective. As for myself, I stood within my unoccupied residence, absorbing the totality of the environment. It conveyed a different sensation now, less burdensome, as though the specters of my past had finally departed. I ought to have experienced a sensation of triumph, but instead, I merely experienced fatigue. A decade and a half, that was the duration I had expended constructing an existence with an individual who, ultimately, perceived me as expendable. A decade and a half of affection, fidelity, and self-sacrifice discarded for avarice. And yet, as I stood there, I experienced a sensation I had not encountered in an extended period. Optimism. Because for the first occasion in many years, my prospective destiny belonged solely to me. And that possessed a value exceeding anything Adam had ever purloined.